the Lord had said to Moses, "Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt." Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his country. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of the houses where they will eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it until morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. And this is how you are to eat it: with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." I'm now going to move further down the page to verse 21. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood in the basin, and put some of the blood on top on both sides of the doorframe. None of you shall go out the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe and will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as he promised, observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, 'What does this ceremony mean to you?' then tell them, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians.' Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all of his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, 'Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said and go, and also bless me.'" I'm now going to go over the page to verse 43. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat it. Any slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies both to the native born and to the foreigner residing among you. And all the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions.
One of my all-time favourite films is called Chicken Run. It is an iconic film, one of the films of my childhood, and it's about a group of chickens trying to escape from a chicken farm. Now, if you haven't seen this classic film, you really should. But if you haven't, it's a spoof of The Great Escape. So instead of POWs, you've got chickens. Instead of Stalag Luft 3, you've got a chicken farm. And instead of Nazis, you have a very scary farmer's wife with a very strong Yorkshire accent. And the big question in the film is, how do they get out? They know they're going to die, so how do they get out of the farm? What will it take for them to enjoy freedom? And I think in many ways it resonates because we all have a sense, don't we, that we're in a mess. Our lives, this world, are messed up. And we want to escape that mess, don't we? And in the film, the chickens are incredibly creative, coming up with multiple schemes and plans to get over the barbed wire fence. And so often we try all sorts of creative schemes to sort out our problems. Sometimes we try and gain weight. Sometimes we try and lose weight. Sometimes we book a holiday. Sometimes we go to the doctor and get medication, or we change that medication. Sometimes we see a counselor. Sometimes we try and follow this or that routine. Sometimes we look for new life hacks, new ways of doing things better. Maybe we upgrade our wardrobes. Maybe we aim for promotion. Maybe we try and change career path and do something different. Maybe we try and declutter our houses and buy some plastic storage from IKEA. I spend half my life in there these days. Maybe we delete that app. Maybe we improve the house somehow. Or if we can't improve the house, we try and move to a better house, a different house. On a bigger picture, sometimes we elect a new council. Sometimes we elect a new government. But we're always trying, aren't we, to get out of a mess. And we try all these different schemes. But I've tried many of these things. And as I've tried them, I found that none of these things have got us out of the mess. It never got me out of the mess. So how do we get out of the mess we're in? And how do we stay out? Last week, we saw how God makes incredible promises to his people. But how do we get those promises for ourselves? How do they become our reality? How do we get out of the mess and stay out? Well, the book of Exodus we've just been reading literally means the way out. And it's set about 600 years after Abraham. And it's about 50 chapters of jam-packed biblical narrative between last week and this week. And I don't have time to summarize it all. In my prep, I tried to find a way of doing it really quickly, but I couldn't do it. It is amazing text. I encourage you to go away and read it. This Exodus really happened. It's a historical event. But it's more than history. It's also our story as well. Now, usually when I preach, I like to go through line by line by line by line by line. But as Laura was reading for about 5 minutes, we could be here for a couple of hours. So I'm going to have to find a way of summarizing it up. But really, this Exodus story is like a Lego model of our story. I'm very grateful to 3 young men in Cheddar Grove Club who lent me some of their Technic Lego. These are models of real cars. So we've got a monster truck here, you can see. We've got, that's a McLaren Extreme E car. And I have no idea what this is, but it looks like the back of it is awesome. The Exodus story is like a Lego model of our real story, of our experience. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the key elements of the story and show you some of the different bits and how they correspond to our story. So if you like, I'm starting with the Lego model and I'm building out to our story. And at the end, I'll close with 2 really important things we need to get out of this. So first off, the first part of our Lego model are the people. Last week, we came across a man called Abraham. Well, his descendants, the Israelites, now are slaves. Their lives are being controlled by the king of Egypt, a pharaoh, and they're being controlled by the Egyptian gods. Now, I don't know what you learned about the Egyptians in school. We learned some really cool things about pyramids, some quite cool diagrams, and things like that. And I remember going away from school thinking the Egyptians were really cool. But as I did more look into them, they were horrifying. You see, the Egyptians in Exodus want to limit and weaken Abraham's children. They're put to hard labor. Their sons are killed, thrown into the Nile. They're cut off. These people have been cut off from the real God, the God who is the definition of freedom. They're completely trapped. And the Egyptians who are enslaving them, they too are slaves. If you read Genesis 47, you can read how all the Egyptian people were servants of the Pharaoh. They're being controlled by him and by the Egyptian gods. They are cut off from the real God. Nobody in this story is free. And neither are we. You see, the reason these solutions we come up with, these hacks we come up with, don't solve the problem is because we are born disconnected from the living God. We're born cut off from the God who is himself freedom. And if you're cut off from freedom, you're trapped. You're in a mess, and you can't get out. Now, of course, we don't bow down to Egyptian gods. We don't bow down to Osiris. We don't bow down to Anubis. We don't bow down to Isis. But we're often controlled by the same things these gods offered: comfort, control, guidance, intimacy, security, solace, and success. Now, of course, stone statues could never offer those things. But that didn't stop people trusting them and trying them. There's a sense here in which every human in this story is a victim. There's a sense in which they're just trapped. They can't do anything else. But there's another sense in which every human being chooses their situation. And that's our situation too. We're trapped, but we choose to be trapped. We often live as if God isn't there. We ignore him. We reject him. Day by day. I do that day by day. And that's what we mean by the word sin. We are both victims of sin and guilty of sin. Every human being manages to be both at the same time. The second element of the story is Pharaoh. He is an evil king. He doesn't care anything about the people he leads. He wants to be God. Now, we all know people a bit like him, people who won't say no people will only say no to what we tell them, because the Lord sends Moses, an Israelite, to demand that Pharaoh release his slaves. Pharaoh says no. We know many people like him: corrupt officials, overbearing bosses, sometimes really unpleasant children. But the language here used to describe Pharaoh in Exodus is the same language used to describe the snake in the Garden of Eden. And so Pharaoh here corresponds to evil forces at work in this very day, both the physical and the spiritual. You see, our world has an evil ruler, and it's not the people you see on the news. It's not the dictators you come across. There is an evil ruler, this present evil age, and the Bible calls him the enemy, the Satan. Pharaoh is the definition of evil. And then we see the Lord. And when the Lord sees darkness in this world, he doesn't stand by. He comes down to Egypt. And the coming of the Lord in the Bible means two things. It means both death and it means life at the same time. Or to put it another way, it means some people are released and others are condemned. The Lord came down in Exodus 12. He visited in the middle of the night. And the New Testament tells us that he will come again one day soon to bring about a complete exodus, to bring us out of the mess that we're in. And it will mean condemnation and death for those who reject him, those who are disconnected from him. But it will mean release and life for others. And the determining feature is the Lamb. Exodus 12, verse 23, when the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe, and he will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. If there is the blood of a perfect lamb without blemish or spot on the doorframe, death would not visit that house. They would enjoy life. The blood of the perfect lamb also means freedom. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also bless me." Friends, in this Lego model, the Lamb is Jesus. He is the one, the perfect Lamb, the one without any wrongdoing, the one who was always connected to God in his life. He is without fault, completely perfect. His blood was shed on the cross when he came, so that when the Lord comes, we might not die, but enjoy life. Not to be condemned, but to enjoy freedom. The Lamb takes the place of the firstborn in this story. And in our story, the Lamb takes our place. Friends, if you're a Christian in this room this morning, the Lamb came and died and has taken your place. And of course, there are far more facets to this Lego model. I haven't even pointed out all of the details. I mean, one of the great things about Lego Technic is there are just so many intricate parts and pieces. And time doesn't permit me to go into all of them. But if you want to have a conversation later, I'd love to chat more about it. I had a great time exploring it. But there are two key things we need to do off the back of this story. And the first is this: to trust the Lamb. Everyone in the Exodus had plenty of chance to trust the Lamb. God gives a lot of advance warning. Chapter 11 that we didn't read is the introduction to this whole section. And then you've got most of chapter 12, where the Lord is simply explaining what's about to happen. And the Egyptians and the Israelites knew exactly who they were dealing with. One thing I haven't yet mentioned is the Passover comes at the end of about 6 chapters of other disasters that hit Egypt. Some of you may remember the story from Sunday school. Moses goes to Pharaoh in chapter 5 and says, "Let my people go." The Lord says, "You must let my people go." And Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" And the chapters that follow chart the social economic disasters that hit Egypt time and time and time again. Both the Egyptians and the Israelites know exactly what they're facing. They've got plenty of warning. We know who we're dealing with. If you're here and you're not yet a Christian, the Lord is coming again. He will come one day soon, and we don't know when. And this morning, if you are here and you do not yet know this Lamb, if you are not yet trusting this precious, perfect Lamb, now is the opportunity. Now is the opportunity. The Lord came at midnight. He comes at a moment we don't expect. Now is the time to put your trust in this Lamb, the Lamb that God has provided. But I recognize that most people in this room are Christians. If you're a Christian, you've put your trust in this Lamb, you have nothing to fear. The Lamb has died. And if you are trusting him, if you're relying on his blood day by day, there is nothing more you need to do to be safe. All the Israelites had to do on that first Passover was to trust in this Lamb. That's it. And they were safe. It's so easy for a Christian to feel utterly crushed under all the things they've done or not done, all the failings, all the ways in which they don't measure up. But if you're a Christian, there is blood on your door. You are safe when the Lord returns to put this world to rights. All that is left for you to do is to walk away, like the Israelites did, out of Egypt. The evil power has no control over you anymore. You have the ability to say no to the things you do wrong. You have the ability to resist the remaining sin in your heart. You don't have to serve Pharaoh anymore. You can do something different. You can enjoy your connection to the living God by the blood of the Lamb. Trust in the Lamb. Secondly, also, remember the Lamb. Now, did you notice in this passage, looking over it perhaps, have a moment to look over it, there is narrative and there are instructions. Instructions what the Israelites are to do on that night, but also in the future. So verse 14, this is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you will celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. And again, verse 17, celebrate the festival of the unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. And then 24, obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as promised, observe this ceremony. And if you look over the instructions, you'll see they involve some key details time and time again. There are specific food items: lamb and unleavened bread without yeast. There are public gatherings. And there's also explaining it to children. Verse 26, when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Now, the night he died, Jesus took the Passover celebration and he changed it. He upgraded it. We now call it the Lord's Supper or communion. And today happens to be a day in which we're going to celebrate it together. And notice the Lord's Supper contains specific food items. It contains bread, and it contains drink. I think we usually use Ribena here, but often it's wines used. It also involves a public gathering, where we are here. And it also should happen in such a way that children can ask questions about it afterwards. Kids, this is one for you. Ask your parents what communion means. So parents, now is the time to get swatting up. Because that's what happens. God is expecting that children will ask us questions about communion, about the Passover, and we need to have answers for it. And at the end of the chapter, we're told who should take the Passover. Verse 43, no foreigner should eat it. Any slave you have bought at the end may eat it after you've circumcised him, but a temporary resident or hired worker may not eat it. The individual must be, in other words, one of God's people. When we share communion in a few minutes' time, if you're here and you know deep down you're not a Christian, without any embarrassment, let the baskets pass by. Communion, the way in which we remember the Lamb, is for Christians, people who have put their trust in Jesus Christ. And also to take Passover, you had to be circumcised. Verse 48, a foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies to both the native born and to the foreigner residing among you. Now, circumcision comes before the Passover in this passage's thinking. And in the same way, Christians down the centuries have said that the new circumcision, that's baptism, comes before communion, the Lord's Supper. And if you're here and you're trusting in the Lamb and you would like to take communion to remember that Lamb, can I encourage you, if you haven't already, get baptized. I've been here 4 months and I haven't yet seen someone baptized, and I'm itching. I'm absolutely itching to see someone get baptized. I gather it happened 2 weeks before I arrived. I'd love to see some more. If you're here and you are a Christian, you are trusting in that Lamb, explore getting baptized and then join the whole gathering as we remember the Lamb whose blood was shed to rescue us. Now, for the rest of us, we have an opportunity in a minute to remember that Lamb that died for us, the one who voluntarily went to the slaughter, the one whose blood was shed, the one who died so that we could live, the one who was bound so that we could be free. We're going to remember that Lamb together. And it has a way of helping you in your Christian walk. A couple of years ago, I had a few months when my walk with God was really hard. I found prayer really hard. I found Bible reading really hard. I was constantly struggling. But what helped me was taking communion with my brothers and sisters. It helped me remember who Jesus is and what he has done. And how I get out of this mess that I'm in. It's not by my own creativity. It's not by my own ingenuity. It's not by my hard work. It's not by my adopting new life hacks. The way I got out was entirely through the Lamb, entirely through Jesus. Friends, communion is here to keep us going, and we're going to share it together in a minute. How do we get out of this mess and stay out? It's by the Lamb. It's by Jesus. He is the only way.